There are 10 Duke Nukem games, and I'm going to rank each of them from best to worst. Over the years, I've had the privilege of playing each of these games multiple times, and I finally settled on my definitive ranking of each one. But my favorite game is not necessarily the one that I think is the best. Stick around to find out what it is. Starting at number 10, the absolute worst Duke Nukem game is Duke Nukem Land of the Babes. Yes, this is not a terribly big surprise because most people who have ever played this game hate it. The lackluster and repetitive gameplay is just absolutely abysmal. It came out only a little while after Time to Kill, and even though Time to Kill wasn't that bad of a game, for some reason Land of the Babes was just bad. It was worse. The combat went from not amazing to bad, totally unbalanced, and it's basically a repeat of Time to Kill, but even worse. The character models look ugly, the uninspired music is everywhere, and we all know that Duke Nukem is not the most family-friendly hero. In Land of the Babes, and maybe you should expect this from the title, he's even raunchier than normal. And the story is just downright depressing in every way. So I'm not really going to talk too much in this video about how Duke Nukem is raunchy in pretty much all of the games, but I did want to mention that Land of the Babes is just a step above acceptable in my opinion. So Duke Nukem, Land of the Babes, definitely bottom of the barrel. Sorry, see you later. Number 9 is Duke Nukem Critical Mass. Now, believe it or not, but Critical Mass is only a few months older than Duke Nukem Forever, which of course we'll get to a little bit later. But how Duke Nukem came out in 2011 and was worse than most of the games that had come before it is astonishing to me. It's not got that bad of a story as far as Duke Nukem games are concerned, but it's not got that good of one either. The controls are incredibly confusing, and the game has a bunch of different game modes, without ever really telling you why, and the controls just constantly change between them, never really allowing you to settle in and get comfortable with things. And overall, Critical Mass is not the worst game I've ever played, it's just so incredibly generic that it's astounding. And that's on top of the fact that it is made for the Nintendo DS, which, I don't know. The Nintendo DS is just not a shooter machine, I'm sorry. But Critical Mass just has a mix of uninteresting gameplay and constant QuickTime events. It seemed like every time I turned around, there was a QuickTime event, or I was repeating the exact same thing I had done 15 times before, and it just made the game seem boring and dull and uninteresting. The music's completely forgettable, which might have been its one redeeming trait had they given it a chance. But it's just very clear that Critical Mass was a play on Duke Nukem Forever coming out. I hope that maybe they could capitalize a little bit on the excitement and the fervor of the game, but it just didn't pan out. Duke Nukem Advance comes in at number 8, and it is an FPS on a Game Boy Advance. I mean, I don't really know what we should have expected from this game. Now, don't get me wrong, it's got an original story, it's got new levels, but a lot of the stuff was ported in from previous games, including the music. The music is actually really good, but that's also because it was imported from Duke Nukem 3D, as well as many of the enemy types and the varieties and the guns and the ammo and things like that. So Duke Nukem Advance, I don't want to dedicate a whole ton of time to because, well, frankly, it's not that bad. But it's also not good. It's a first-person shooter on the Nintendo Advance. It doesn't look amazing because it's on the Advance. It doesn't play amazing because it's on the Advance. There's something here to this game, and there's something nice about having Duke Nukem on a handheld, but it just doesn't quite click. Somehow Duke Nukem Forever ended up at number 7 on this list, and I don't know how it ended up this high.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
The game was forever in development and is often used as an example of what not to do when you're making a game. Duke Nukem Forever is exceedingly vulgar, and it doesn't bother me that it's vulgar, it bothers me that it's not clever when it's doing it. I like a little bit of irreverence in a game. But Duke Nukem Forever was just so lazy in the way it chose to tell its humor, it didn't really do justice to the character at all. And I could make a 45-minute video about all the ways that Duke Nukem Forever tore down everything that Duke Nukem had done before, but that's for another time. Here's the thing about Duke Nukem Forever. It's not too bad of a game. It's got a lot of ideas, it does some cool things, but it's just got too many of them. There's a lot of filler. There's too many mini games, too many puzzles, too many gimmicks. I don't need to remote control an RC car around. At the same time, I'm in a golf course. At the same time, I'm doing 1,000 other things. The story in this game just doesn't make any sense. Duke Nukem is, of course, trying to save the world, but he's all over the map with no reason why he should be there. It's pretty clear that development on this game started in the 90s and it never changed. They never took a moment to think about what they should have done or what they shouldn't have done. And Duke Nukem is coming out in 2011 with the exact same humor he had in the 90s. And while, again, I love the 90s humor of Duke Nukem, it just didn't hit. Still, because I was such a fan and had been looking forward to the game for so long, I had a ton of fun with Duke Nukem Forever. It's just not that good of a game.
Now I've got a really bad feeling about this.
Duke Nukem Time to Kill comes in at number 6, and it is the first third-person entry in the series. It's got a slower and more methodical pace to the game, and that's a nice change of pace, especially after Duke Nukem 3D had come out a few years before. It is a bit difficult to figure out the controls in the game, and of course it's a third-person game, so it controls a lot differently than Duke traditionally has. But once you do figure out the controls, it's not a bad game. There's lots of stuff to explore and the environments are really cool. It had some rough edges, but the gameplay overall wasn't bad. As a matter of fact, a lot of people really liked it because of the comparison to Tomb Raider. As a matter of fact, Time to Kill was actually called Duke Raider in development because of the similarities to the game. So Time to Kill is an example of a game that has a sequel in Land of the Babes, but it happens to be way better in almost every way than its sequel. At number 5, we have the OG Duke Nukem. That's right, back when platforming games were not that great for PC. Duke Nukem came along and flipped things on their head. He wasn't the guy we quite know him as now, and the story is almost non-existent. The gameplay, though, and especially considering its time, is light years ahead of anything else on the horizon. The game is really simple, and it's fairly easy, but it's incredibly engaging for the time. It's colorful, it's beautiful, it's got great sound effects, it has almost everything you could ever want in 1991 as a PC gamer trying to play a platformer about a cool guy. The original Duke Nukem did have some faults. It's only got one weapon. You have a few upgrades for it, but overall, you're pretty limited. You've got some handy pickups like the grappling hook, and that makes things a little bit more fun. Overall, Duke Nukem, the original, is a pretty great game, even still today. Coming in at number 4 is Duke Nukem Manhattan Project. Now, this is the first 2D side-scroller we had gotten after 10 years from the original Duke Nukem games. And even though 2D side-scrollers are usually pretty simplistic, Manhattan Project was pretty vast and open, had huge and unique environments that were lots of fun with plenty to explore. The game absolutely looks fantastic and completely changes the art style we had known with Duke Nukem up to that point. Duke talks enough to be funny, but he doesn't talk so much as to be annoying. The controls aren't quite as responsive as they could be, which, of course, in a platformer, especially a 2D platformer, this is kind of a big problem. But overall, the gameplay and the story are good enough to land it at the number 4 spot. Duke Nukem 0 Hour comes in at number 3 on our list, and it is amazing that this game made it onto the Nintendo platform. As we know over the years, Nintendo has had varying levels of censorship and things that they would allow and not allow on the platform, and you would think Duke Nukem as a character wouldn't be allowed there at all. A few years before that, we had Duke Nukem 64, which had been heavily modified from Duke Nukem 3D. Otherwise, pretty much the exact same, but Duke Nukem 0 Hour is the first original entry we got on the Nintendo system. In 0 Hour, there's a huge arrangement of time periods and locations, and frankly, they're all a lot of fun. When Duke goes to different time periods and different places, he is dressed differently no matter how he goes, he talks a little bit differently, and the enemies he encounters are varied as well. There's a bunch of funny costumes and environments. If you're in the Old West or Victorian England, you're going to see something a little different. 0 Hour also had a lot of hidden secrets, but it was fairly linear. You could get through the game pretty quickly, but if you wanted to explore, you also had that option. The controls are great, and they're tight, and that's a pretty big compliment considering you had to use the N64 controller to play it. Speaking of the N64, even though it was one of the biggest graphical powerhouses we had seen up to that point, 0 Hour came along and took advantage of the expansion pack, which allowed you to have better graphics. The only problem with that is, even though the graphics are amazing, there's still some pretty choppy gameplay. The N64 wasn't quite up to what Duke needed it to be, but overall, Duke Nukem 0 Hour is a fun game, it's a blast to play, and overall it's a real treat getting to play this game on the N64 controller when so many other shooters just didn't work quite right. At number 2, and this one's probably going to make a lot of you mad, is my personal favorite Duke Nukem game, Duke Nukem 3D. It is my favorite game, but I have to admit, it's not the best game. It was a revolution from the games in the series before it. Duke Nukem 3D was also my first game in the Duke Nukem series. The game was an absolute sensation. It inspired a bunch of spin-offs and special editions. You've got Duke Nukem World Tour, Duke Nukem 64, the Atomic Edition, and I'm not going to treat those as separate releases even though they technically were because they have the same basic backgrounds. But the game was just undeniable in its influence and the way that it impacted people when they played it. The weapon options in Duke Nukem 3D are insane. And unlike a lot of games where you have a lot of different weapons that don't necessarily mean anything, all of these guns are useful. Anything from the minigun to the RPG is going to come into play at some point. There are cool items like the jetpack and the Holoduke, things that we hadn't really seen in first-person shooters up to that point. And the game was made on the legendary Build engine. Games like Power Slave and Shadow Warrior, and more recently the awesome Ion Fury that came out back in 2019. You should really check that out if you haven't, by the way. The Build engine was remarkable, and it allowed for tons of different mods and map packs that were both developer and user created. As a matter of fact, I think I had one. It was probably really bad that was built and actually put out on a big conglomeration of map packs that they put out on a CD at one point. It was bad. Don't try to find it. I haven't personally, and that should tell you something. But Duke Nukem 3D is one of the games that really changed the way that many people looked at gaming in 1996. The expansions came out as well, including Duke It Out in DC and Life's a Beach, and there were so many that were just really good, and this was undoubtedly a cash cow and a moment in the industry that many people will never forget. Coming in at the top spot is Duke Nukem 2. Now I know, I said it wasn't my favorite, but I do think it's the best game. Duke Nukem 1 may have started it all, but Duke Nukem 2 is why the series really kept existing. You start to see the more iconic look we know Duke as, and this game took everything from Duke Nukem 1 and it made it better. They added crouching and shooting up. Imagine shooting up being a new concept. It's hard to remember. Climbing ladders and hanging and all sorts of new weapons and types of ammo and everything like that. You've got more colorful graphics, improved sound. Everything about Duke Nukem 2 improved on Duke Nukem 1, and this is exactly what we needed in the time it released. If it weren't for Duke Nukem 2, I don't think we would have gotten any of the other games after it. Even with as good as Duke Nukem 1 was, it wasn't quite enough on its own to continue on to a game like the masterpiece that is Duke 3D. And I think that's part of why I give Duke Nukem 2 so much credit. Not only is it a near perfect platformer for the PC at the time, but also it gave them enough steam to be able to produce the games after it. And that is really why I put Duke Nukem 2 at the top of the list. What is your top rated Duke Nukem game? Remember, it's not necessarily your favorite, I'm just asking you which game you think is the best in the series. Be sure to comment down below and let me know what you think, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.